afternoon and morning. My name is Bernardo Garcia, and I am part of the BitScript team. And I'm here to talk to you about the current state of Bitcoin web development. A little bit of a touchy subject with developers as talented as you guys, but web developers still breathe, and we still need you guys. And I think you guys need us. So, what I want to get across today, overall, is it is almost arguably easier for a new Bitcoiner to create a BIP than it is for a new Bitcoiner to fully understand what it's like to send a Bitcoin transaction. I'm showing you here the growth of probably one of the most fundamental libraries. One of the libraries is the cornerstone of Bitcoin culture is Bitcoin JS lib. These people are amazing. These people have been putting in work from day one. Though, if you really think about how much of importance and how much the concept of Bitcoin, how much the concept of BIPs, how much the structure of the Bitcoin culture has grown and evolved from the growth of, compared to the growth of Bitcoin JS, it is pretty stagnant. Web developers are using tools that, one way or another are pretty archaic and not very flexible. So what is our goal? From BitScript, our goal was to basically onboard as many Bitcoin developers as we could possibly get our hands on. And as well, there was a realization where we may have to put two segments towards what is a Bitcoin developer. There are protocol developers, which is the majority of the people here. The majority of people probably want and aspire to be protocol developers, but there's also web and app developers for Bitcoin. These two segments have never been highlighted more, and the need to offer tools towards the former, the web developers and app developers, has never been more important. So I'm going to begin this by telling you a bit about my journey and why I believe I have enough experience to tell you guys about this subject and what I have done for this. So I'm part of a team of BitScript, and as I was saying, our job was to get as many Bitcoin developers on board. So how did we start? We started from the basics of wanting to create documentation. There's nothing better than landing on a website as a developer and seeing documentation. Everybody has seen that first time they've seen Stripe documentation. You're like, wow, this is pretty nuts. So if you really put the comparison of the Stripe documentation towards the documentation for the BIPs wiki, obviously there's a lot missing. So I wanted to create something where we could visually view how certain items work. So create more visual and more user interactions for what documentation is and how we want to interact with our users for this. Maybe the question is, do web developers need to understand what opt-up does? Not really as much of the focus, but more is telling more of a story of what these documentations and what these functional items require and need. Getting kind of dirty with the documentation. A lot of the times when app developers or web developers go forward and read documentation, they're like, cool, this makes sense. What do I actually need to test this out? How can I implement these items as quickly as possible? And that's something that Bitcoin holds a lot of needed growth in. It is very hard to go from concept to a safe environment to deploy and test out these ideas. So we created a simple, visual indication of seeing, these are transactions. This is what goes in a transaction. These are the steps. Demo isn't really as important, but more of the highlight is we wanted to put, concept to real visual indication as quickly as possible. As well, we built a little IDE that gives you an idea of what it's actually like to write a script. What is being moved? What is being pushed? How does this move within the stack in a visual sort of sense? So, we kept going forward, we kept iterating, and we got to a point where we realized, are we happy with the tools that we have today? I personally don't believe so. I personally believe we're in a place where the tools were handed to us and we've accepted it. But that can't really live much forward given the growth of Bitcoin, given how fast certain areas are growing and certain people beginning to build. So our goal again is to create an environment where Bitcoin web development doesn't hold web developers back. At the time being, web developers on Bitcoin have a very scary time moving forward and seeing how things are working, seeing where they can really input, what libraries they trust, what libraries they can't trust. So these are the four, in my personal opinion, biggest tools. I don't know Obviously, is us talking about the first one, Bitcoin JS, Bitcoin monorepo. That one's insane. Secure BTC signer. Shout out to Paul Miller. That guy's amazing. Bcoin. These tools, whether we like it or not, introduce a very high barrier to entry. These tools have some documentation. These are the type of tools where the documentation is in the code. There's no NPM module documentation level here. Whether that's a problem or not is not really for the sake of this discussion, but it is a thing that we should be constantly observable and know what we're introducing to a community of the web developers. So what tools do web developers expect? Web developers expect, as much as I hate to say it, to make it as easy as possible for them. They're not the most out there, and sometimes they can be labeled as pretty lazy, but that's just the culture and that's the world that they're in, and we're not going to change that. But we do have to understand that we have to work with that area. So what we may be missing. It's a little bit of a standard issue of somebody has to take a stance and say, I will put myself out there and make this open source or closed source structured format of building and creating Bitcoin tools. The idea there is that it's not just the individual, but it creates the culture for everybody to start to share. Because one thing I've learned is most people have built their own solution for a lot of problems that other developers already have. Most people have built their own reg test network to be able to spin up quickly. Most people have built a testing suite to test wallet functionality. Most people, at least most of you guys. Most web developers do not, and do not even know how to get access to that information. That is just something that, whether for the better or worse, has been a little closed off towards the bigger web community. Obviously agreed, because it is technically very difficult to get there. So, who web developers are building for today? Before Bitcoin, customers and users were very technical. We're very out there. We're very, go-ho cowboys. Sadly, as one of the double sides of success is more and more, as some people would like to call them, normies, are becoming and entering the Bitcoin world. That is just, a product of success and a product that we have to be very aware of. And these people expect a more higher degree of UX that we have been failing. If we really compare the Bitcoin UX towards other currencies, other L2s, or just anything outside of a cryptocurrency that's not Bitcoin, the UX in Bitcoin is just falling behind. It's something that we just have to stomach, and we have to accept that this is not the best way that we want to present ourselves given the tools that we have currently. We are building so much incredibly good architecture, so much incredibly amazing technology in the background that's just being displayed and being used in a way that doesn't best highlight how it's going. So, on one side is the Bitcoin.js GitHub page. Yeah, they're currently not using the website. That's up to them. There's nothing wrong with that. But still, on the right side is the Ethereum Web3 module homepage. That is our competition, whether we want to accept that or not, when it comes from a Bitcoin web development forum. That is who is taking most of our web developers. That is who is just moving that needle along on their end more. And we need to recognize competition, and we need to recognize that if we really want to be able to enhance our users' experience, we have to be able to build products that best highlight the tools that we're building and not limiting ourselves at the very end. It almost seems that Bitcoin web development, the bottleneck is at the people who are building the UXs and not at the people building the protocols. And that is the core of my speech. That is us, and our mission for BitScript is to onboard any Bitcoin developers. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. So,
what would you say are some good examples of Bitcoin companies that are offering a good UX or developer kit to Bitcoin or web developers? Besides you guys.
None. Yeah, everybody, or at least or at least it's gated. Quick node, but still, it's hard for me to say that quick node. The quick node customer base. If you went to the quick node executive, I don't think they would say that Bitcoin is a customer base that they're very focused on. And it's just from a developer kit, it's very building on Bitcoin from a developer kit is almost not exact. There's just you have to piece together multiple libraries. You have to use multiple different ways. And most of the time, like I said before, you end up building your own solution.
So with that said, what do you think are some examples from, I'm gonna say the C word, from crypto companies that we can emulate visually to Bitcoin companies? Because I totally agree with what you're saying about how, let's like Ethereum is giving really, really good SDKs to our developers. And I think Bitcoiners, Bitcoin companies could really emulate that with for Bitcoin.
Yeah, as much as I personally don't want to admit it, Solana has an amazing React. The Solana homepage has so many examples of React examples of how to get going as quickly as possible. The hello world for almost every other cryptocurrency is consumable, whereas the hello world for Bitcoin is non-existent. There is no hello world. There is no quick contract to deploy. There is no, at least no one's creating content for this. And so that is something that stops Bitcoin web developers from moving forward. It's just, how hard is it really to get your own network running, to run tests? Like, how much information do you need to know underlying just to be able to start a reg test network and then deploy that to your own RPC? It's just massive amounts of information you have to consume quickly. Well, while the information may not be difficult, it's just an insane amount of information you have to just consume and be like, okay, now I know where to go.
Hi, so I am one of those web devs, so I definitely agree with you. The documentation could sometimes be easier or faster to grasp. So you have shown me the BitScript yesterday on the desk, and I was wondering, do you already support Lightning, or do you have plans to have Lightning documentation?
We have plans to support Lightning in a bunch of L2s, though our main mission was Bitcoin. We wanted to cover the fundamentals for Bitcoin first before we thought we were confident enough to build a system for other chains or other L2s. Sweet. Appreciate for your time, guys. Thank you.